Welcome back to a new video. So I previously tried to record this and the audio got a little messed up. So we're going to try it again, hopefully not spill the water I just bumped with my hand. But this video was inspired by the recent Jeff Nippard video, as well as a comment on a Greg Doucette video, which I don't watch much of Greg Doucette, but I happened to be watching it just because I was curious what his response was to the recent Jeff Nippard video and kind of how he would try to justify people having 1 in a million genetics at an extremely high rate. And the comment was about essentially 1 in a million genetics, resulting in about 340 people in the United States having that elite genetics that are seemingly very common when you look at a lot of the so-called naturals that are all over the internet. And so the first thing I wanted to look at was the average bicep size. So before making this, I measured my biceps, my flex bicep, which is about 16 and a half inches, which I don't know if that is um, necessarily good or bad, at least according to, if we're comparing it to the average, it's above the average. I've trained since very consistently since I've been 15, and even before that, I did train, just wasn't able to do as much because I was still playing basketball at that time. But that 15, when I was 15, sophomore in high school, that's when I stopped playing basketball. So I had the whole winter to train, and I've always responded really well to training. But all my training has been really focused on sports performance now for Olympic weightlifting, but even back then, be able to run faster or jump higher. So it wasn't necessarily ever truly bodybuilding focused for a variety of reasons, but mostly just because I wanted to be better at sports and I didn't really care about bodybuilding. So I would say, definitely could have larger biceps in theory if I trained them, significantly harder, but it would make my mobility worse for cleans and front squats, which wouldn't really be ideal. But if you look at the averaged male between 20 and really 49, you're going to have between 13 and if we round up to 14-inch biceps when they're flexed. And then if you're trained, 15 to 17 inches, which my biceps fall in that range. And then elite levels above 18 plus inches, which is quite large. So then looking at a bell curve here of that statistic up there for the 20 to 29 average bicep size, you can see kind of just how little of the percentage of people, population density as it has over here, of the people that are going to have 17 plus inches, and also on the other side having 10 or below. And that's just kind of how bell curves work. You have most people that are going to be in the middle, and then as you get to further sides, there can be explanations for that for a variety of reasons. Someone that is training a lot, someone that is on performance enhancers are going to be on the higher end of the spectrum, and then people that have some sort of genetic disorder or some sort of nutritional deficit are going to be on the lower end of that range. So just kind of a good kind of thing to look at. And obviously, maybe this isn't 100% accurate as far as all of the statistics go, but I think it gives us a general benchmark of what the average size of the arm is and kind of how that is placed upon a bell curve. And one thing that I think is kind of interesting to think about is that if you think about someone that has extremely large biceps and how rare that is, if you think about the other end of that spectrum and how rare someone with extremely small biceps, as far as them being flexed, and how rare that is. I mean, if you think about just average people, you're just walking down the street, you're not generally going to find someone that, if they had a flexed bicep or they were showing a flexed bicep, would be smaller than 10 inches. That'd be pretty rare to find, just like someone with above 17 inches. I think that's pretty pretty reasonable to say for the most part. So then if we look at the number of the US population that are males in that 20 to 29 range, it's a total of about 23.5 million. And so then if we use that bell curve as, that to create a data point of people that have 17 or more, at least according to ChatGPT, it's giving us, 2,500 males in that range that have 17-inch or greater. So essentially they have bigger biceps than mine, which I think my arms are generally, relatively large, especially compared to, average people. And so you have, a good amount of people, but that's just above 17 inches. So then if we look above equal to or greater than 19 inches, which I would say is kind of towards that like elite bodybuilder standard, you're getting to extremely low level of people. And this is, this extremely weird percentage or low percentage, I should say. And the total amount of people is 0.14 people, so less than one in that 20 to 29 range. And obviously, these are not the literal numbers. You're going to have more than 0.14 because we see them, whether they're on performance enhancers or not, they exist. And what this kind of shows is that the likelihood of those people existing is extremely low. If you're flipping a coin, it's 50% whether it's heads or tails. It could land on heads every single time, but every time it does that, the likelihood of that continuing to happen is less and less and less. The statistical likelihood of you landing heads on a coin twice is much less than doing it 10 times in a row. And with that being said, it's possible. So it's obviously possible for these people to exist, just really low chance for that to happen. And so when you're thinking about, what happens or why someone would have extremely small biceps, we could say, well, there's a nutritional deficit, they have a disorder of some sort, there's some sort of reason for that. Generally, you're not going to most likely naturally have, 9-inch biceps or 10-inch biceps when they're flexed, unless there's some sort of underlying cause to that. And you can extrapolate that, or you can think about that on the other end of the spectrum. If you have extremely large biceps, that you're almost surely not going to see that unless there's some sort of other cause, some other substance that they're taking to do with that. And when you're thinking about that as well, the likelihood that someone that trains for only a couple of years is going to be on that top end of the spectrum is significantly less likely to happen as well, unless you're adding in additional factors with that. And you can extrapolate that, as you can see right here. I was asking ChatGPT for Olympic snatch weight. You can extrapolate that to strength work as well, to where if you're thinking about top end strength or elite levels of strength, just the idea that people getting to those really high numbers is really unlikely. When they do it in only a couple of years, it's even less likely. And when they're better than everyone else that's been training for a while, you kind of see what I'm trying to get at. It becomes less and less likely that there's not other factors that are accounting for that extreme difference, even at elite levels. So this is the second bell curve that I made for, or that was made for me, I should say. That is just the average person, and it's only 60 kilograms. So that's a really low number, even for someone that's trained weightlifting for a very short amount of time would be able to do more than 60 kilograms as a male, especially in that 20 to 29 range. So I asked for elite levels, which is significantly higher at that 130. Now, this number is going to obviously be a bit skewed because elite level, it doesn't account for body weight, of course, but also you are looking at a lot of people that are literally on steroids, like they're just, whether they are open or not, they've been caught, like Lasha Talhadzi, like been caught on steroids. It's just like you have people that are obviously on it. So that's going to skew that number, of course, of what is an actual average number. But if we're looking at elite, 130, I would say that's definitely like an elite snatch for almost anyone at any body weight. If you can get to that number, that is really, really good for anyone. But then if we are using that same sort of logic and looking up at, 170, it's extremely unlikely that you're going to see that in someone that's age 20 to 20, really at anyone at any age. But then if you have someone that's, trained for a couple of years, maybe someone like a Carlos Nassar that, has been training hard or was able to get up to, 170 when he was like 17 or 18, conceivably is only able to really train hard since he was, 13 or 14, rapidly made progress. Is he a hyper responder to training? Probably. Does he really athletic? Obviously. But obviously there's a lot of other supplementation that's helping with that. And if you look at the other end of the spectrum, if that at the 90 kilogram, that's probably people that are lighter in body weight, or that's probably the most common thing, because 90 is pretty, if you're thinking about elite weightlifters, 90 is pretty light for that. But when you're looking at those kind of extremes, how do people get up to those? The 225 snatch, which would be the top of the bell curve. Only one person's ever done that. When you see that kind of thing, you kind of know what's happening there, and you can extrapolate that as well to thinking about bodybuilders and stuff like that. When you start to get to extremely difficult things to achieve for anyone, whether they are on performance enhancers or not, because I mean, if you think about, a 170 plus snatch, vast majority of elite weightlifters are not doing that, or at least a lower percentage of them. If you're getting to 170, 180, you're getting to those numbers, whatever body weight that you're at, the percentage of people that are doing that are lower and lower and lower. And those are all people that are been training for a bunch of years, that are understandably athletic people that have good coaching, a good system around them to make sure that they have all the other just general support that you would need to be able to achieve those numbers. But then even if you add in the performance enhancer on top of that, it's still responding well. That's why someone like Lasha or Colors Nassar is still interesting, despite the fact that we know what they're doing to get to those numbers, is because everyone that's around them is also doing those things, and they are responding better to that. That's why it's still impressive to see someone with 19, 20-inch arms when you know what they're doing to their bodies to get to those numbers, because most people who are even taking performance enhancers aren't going to achieve those numbers. I think one of the weirdest experiences I had was someone that was at a previous gym I was at. I was talking with a friend. They're like, yeah, that person told me that they're taking steroids and they didn't look very strong. They didn't look very jacked. It was a very weird experience because it was almost like I thought they were lying about taking it, but they probably were. I have no reason to think that they would just, make that up for no reason. But there are people that take performance enhancers that don't have elite physiques. And I think that's also a misnomer that as soon as you take those, that you don't have to work hard, that you'll just magically achieve that. Obviously, people who are on that are able to work harder. And I think that's one of the probably another misnomer or a idea that people have is that you don't have to work as hard when you're taking that stuff, so it's easier. And like, no, you get to work harder. You feel better, you recover faster, you respond better. Everything works better when you're doing that. It's like the idea of when I was 15, when I got my learner's permit, I was 135 pounds, and that was like the first year where I had the whole winter where I could just train the whole time and I didn't have to worry about playing basketball. And not that basketball is bad for anything like that, but I wasn't expending all those calories playing basketball and spending that time playing basketball. So I was just lifting and eating, and that was it. And I was able to go from 135, I believe I was to like 155 by January of that year. So just in a short couple of months. And I would say that's a pretty, good response with that. Now, a lot of that initial weight gain is probably the fact that I wasn't fighting, all the caloric restrictions from just playing basketball a whole bunch, or the energy expenditure, I should say, from just playing basketball constantly and just being able to be in a surplus, but also just the fact that I generally have always responded really well to training. I went from 135 to that 155 mark by that January of that year. Maybe it was 150, maybe I'm exaggerating that. But by the time I finished high school, I was about 175 pounds. And then when I started college, I was able to work my way up throughout college to 200 and still remaining relatively lean. So putting on a significant amount of muscle mass, getting stronger, and all of this sort of stuff. So I have always responded well. So when I think about kind of the genetics that I was kind of blessed with, because my dad is also very similar to that, to where very large, wide frame and respond well to training. It's kind of that genetic predisposition. If you respond well to something, you kind of enjoy it because you're getting a positive response to it. So you're kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in that regard. But if you were to add in my case, performance enhancing drugs at really at any point, I would have exponentially, went to the point where I'm at now a lot earlier, or even past it to that point. And the reason for me, to go through all this and to, talk through all this is that we are often, people that interact with the internet see people that are, seemingly genetic outliers constantly. And the truth of it is that they are in some aspects. Like, they work hard, they respond well to training, they have good muscle insertions, whatever it happens to be for maybe bodybuilding, but for weightlifting, like, they have good athletic ability. There are things that they do outside of that, like taking performance enhancers, that allow them to push beyond that point. We look at Ian Wilson, American weightlifter, who's able to get up to really strong numbers, being drug tested all the time, and after all these years of training, took a year off, came back, blasted everything, was able to beat all of his old numbers. And that was someone that was reaching very elite numbers. I forget what he did before, but it was, I think, above 170 and getting to like 210 or something without any of the performance enhancer. Was able to go beyond that. If you look at his like last competition, when he was just blasting away, and got caught with very common weightlifting steroid drugs that he was taking. And you see that and you realize that is someone that was weightlifting from a very young age, extremely talented, had all of the work ethic, had all of the situation, kind of like in a Hampton Morris situation where it's like everything is set up for him to be lifting in a perfect situation. And then he gets to the end of his career, takes a little bit of steroids, and suddenly he's able to beat all of his numbers. You can extrapolate that if he had 10 years of all of that extra supplementation, he's going to recover better. He's still going to have all of that mental disposition to work hard. And you were like, wow, like suddenly Lasha's 225 is a lot more of a conceivable number that someone could do if you take an Ian Wilson type athlete, to where you start young, you have a good system, you have good athletic ability, you respond naturally well to training, whether it's from like a motor skills standpoint to where you can learn the movements, improve the movements, be consistent with it from an athletic standpoint, but also just like you have good muscle building properties in general. And then you add into like you recover better, you feel better, you're more aggressive because you're on some of those performance enhancers. You get more muscle mass in areas without having to do as much specific work for that. And you're able to avoid major injuries because you have so much more muscle mass. You can kind of see like how it exponentially goes up, at least to a certain point. And that's doesn't take away that like Lasha's 225, nobody else has done that. And there's been lots of other, heavyweight guys that have been up to that level. And the point of bringing that as well is that, when you see someone that is significantly stronger than you, it doesn't mean that, oh, that person's immediately on steroids. I can't learn anything from that guy. He takes drugs. Like you can learn a lot from people that are taking performance enhancers that are at that elite level because they are still training. They still have to do all of the same things that you do. They just get to have that extra recovery boost, which is the biggest thing that you get from those performance enhancers. Obviously, it helps you build muscle and stuff, but if you recover, you're able to train harder and it kind of, feeds into itself. But what's important is that you look at those people and you don't go, wow, that 17-year-old just snatched 170 kilos and I can only snatch whatever you can snatch and feel bad about yourself. The numbers that you're doing are only relative to what you have done previously. And comparing yourself to someone else can be useful if you're looking for technical improvements. You're just looking for the sheer awe of someone lifting a really heavy weight. But when you get to the point where you're like, man, that person does 10 kilos more, it's like, what are they doing different? Well, in small amounts, that's probably someone that started earlier, is more athletic, just responds better to the training in general. But once we start looking at kind of the extremes, if we look at kind of this bell curve, if I'm kind of at this 130 mark, my best snatch ever is 135, but I would say conceivably if I was like, what's my max, gun to my head, what can I do on a given day is about 130. Now, if someone's doing 140, I'm not going to think, wow, that person's on all of the drugs in the world to do 10 kilos more. And say, yeah, they probably started earlier. They respond better to the training. They can work potentially a little bit harder, but it's like they're just, many factors that they're able to push beyond that. And same with 150 and even 160. You could extrapolate to that. It's like once you get to like 170, 180, it's like then things become, it's like, all right, this person has everything going well for them. They're athletic. They respond really well to training. And they're still going beyond all of those other people that are beyond that. Because it's very easy for me to think of people that have a better situation to lift than what I'm currently at. And then you extrapolate up kilos and kilos and kilos from there to say, it's like, all right, if everything was going well, I started earlier, I responded even better to the training. It's like, yeah, I'd probably get to, 150, 160 if I was in that like perfect environment of lifting and, earlier coaching, all of that sort of stuff. And it's like, man, getting to 170, it's like, yeah, I mean, it's like if you think about like if you have, 100 people that all can get to that 160, they're in that perfect situation. You're gonna have people that are genetic outliers getting closer to that. It's like, man, then you start pushing it beyond that. You kind of realize, what kind of things people have to do to get beyond those levels. So the reason for thinking that is that it allows you to understand your own lifting and to feel better about your own lifting because at the end of the day, this 130, being an average for a bell curve is not really one that is important for anyone to look at it. I mean, if you think about 60 kilograms, if you are able to snatch 100, a very small percentage of people that ever will do a snatch are going to get to that number. And then if you look at 120, even smaller percentage. So if you're getting to 120 plus, like you are elite in a lot of ways to where you are getting to that higher mark. And that's not to say that if you're at 60 or 80 or whatever, that you're not a good weightlifter. I mean, 60 is like, someone that's never done a snatch before could do. But then if you are really light, these numbers become a little bit different as well. Same with the elite. If you're really light, 130 might be the heaviest that someone has ever, like Hampton Morris. I don't know if he's snatched more than 130, but like he's really light. So like obviously this number, like there's no one that is at his body weight in any country that's doing 170. So the bell curve is going to look a little bit different for that. But it's important to put that all into context because you want to feel good about your lifting and that you are working hard and that you are accomplishing things. And most people are. If you are consistently training, you are trying to do the correct things, you are going to make progress, and it's just not going to be the hyper elite level of progress that you see other people are able to do. And like I said, that's nutrition. That's them starting earlier, having better coaching, just being more athletic, naturally responding to training better. And also, some of them at the hyper elite level are doing a lot of that stuff after that or on top of that to get even a hyper response. And, people can argue that there's a higher percent of people that are taking drugs than even I would think. But, you know, whatever that number is, you know that it exists because you see people at like the Olympic level, whether it's Olympia for bodybuilding or Olympia for Olympics for weightlifting. You know what people are doing at the hyper elite level, and it's just kind of when you're thinking of like, well, what's that cutoff to like, what can you get to without taking that? And it's honestly different for everyone. I mean, when I think about myself, if I were to fully start blasting, like a 150 snatch seems pretty realistic. Getting above that, probably not. But that doesn't mean that other people couldn't get beyond that. Obviously, that would be different. And it's important to understand that in context of your own lifting. But in conclusion, worry about your own lifting and the numbers that you have done. And looking back at that's why I love filming all of my lifts, because then I can look back at even a couple of years ago, but even more, and you can see the progress that you have made. Because at the end of the day, you want to get stronger, you want to lift a heavier number, but it's about working hard towards a goal that you have to try to progress towards, some nebulous thing of your own potential. And comparing yourself or worrying about, well, this person can do this, so I should be able to do that. It can be helpful in a competitive context, but it can also be really harmful when you have periods of training, which is more and more frequent the more advanced that you do get towards your genetic ceiling, that you'll have periods of training where you don't always hit a little bit more than the previous block or the previous time frame where you tested, and you'll have periods of time where nothing goes up or nothing feels good. And it's important to realize that even in those times, like you're still the reasons that progress stops is because you're reaching towards your genetic ceiling, and it doesn't mean that you should stop or not work hard or not try to figure things out, but it's exponentially more difficult to get more and more stronger as you get stronger. When you first start, everyone can add a lot of weight to all of their lifts, but then eventually you hit that wall. And as long as you understand that, and you understand that it's a competition with yourself at any point, always, then I think that that is the most useful thing. That is by far my favorite part of lifting weights in general, is that it's never a competition with other people. Even if you go to a competition, it shouldn't ever be about what other people are lifting and trying to beat them unless you need to get money. But at that point, like you're a hyper elite lifter, your lifting context is different. For the average person, it's about trying to beat what you have previously done, trying to improve upon what you have previously done, because it's about self improvement in that regard. And as long as you keep that context to your in your mind, to where it's about trying to improve yourself, and trying to do everything that you can to just obviously be healthy in general, but trying to push your performance as much as you can, then I think that you'll be a happier person. You'll maybe you lift a little bit better than you would have, but you won't get those moments where you feel discouraged because you see a person's younger than me, they're lighter than me, and they're snatching or clean jerking, whatever, they're doing a lot better than me. Because once you realize that, if you look at this bell curve that I still have up here, you realize that as you get further up the bell curve, it's less and less people. And even where you're at, if I'm putting myself on this bell curve being here, it's like there's not a lot of people that are getting to 100 to 120 or 120 plus. So it's like you're already kind of you've already accomplished a lot, I think, for most people. And, stick with it and be happy, because the progress that you made is better than most people will ever make when they're lifting. And this is true of the snatch, the clean jerk, but also even if you have bodybuilding goals. If you have 17-inch arms, like I mean, we saw here above, like that's a really low percentage. I mean, even if you're at 16, even if you're at 15, it's like you're already on the top end of the threshold of any male around. And obviously this could be extrapolated to the females as well. But yeah, so feel better about yourself because you're doing a good job. I think that's the main conclusion with that. And you always want to do better, but don't worry about it as much. Just try to work hard. That's really the crux of it. But yeah, that's it for this one. Hopefully the audio worked this one, so I don't have to do another recording. But yeah, that's it for this one. Talk to you all in the next one. Have a great day. Peace.